When was the last time I uploaded a video about upcoming TLOU stuff? Let's see. Let's see here, 2022, nope, 2021, oof, yeah, that's not a lot of videos. 2020, yeah, maybe, 2019, huh, wait. How long ago is that again? Almost 2.5 years? Jesus Christ! Well, I guess it's about damn time we got into some TLOU news then. Hey stragglers and tourists, my name is the iPad Cat, and in this video we're going to be talking about anything and everything regarding the very credible rumor of a The Last of Us PS5 remake. And yes, it is a rumor, albeit one with a lot backing it up. But nothing is actually officially confirmed yet. And I'm also aware that I'm late to the party on this one. Very, very late. So why don't we get on with it? I realize most of you watching this right now have long since heard about this and maybe even forgot about it or moved on. But I still feel like a good place to start is to aggregate a lot of the information we have in a sort of everything we know segment, both as a refresher for people who might have forgotten and as a preface to actually discuss it. Sources for everything are in the description as well as on the screen when it fits. The story of the Last of Us PS5 remake starts sometime between the second half of 2018 and the first half of 2019. When Michael Mumbauer, one of the leading figures of a Sony studio called Visual Arts Service Group, formed a team of around 30 people to expand upon previously released exclusive titles. His initial idea was to remake the original Uncharted game, but as it turned out, given the age of the title, it would be far too expensive and require too much work to be feasible. Instead, they decided to go with The Last of Us, which is 6 years newer and substantially more modern and therefore easier and less expensive to remake. Sony leadership was, however, skeptical and didn't grant the studio the budget to hire the talent required to work on the project properly. Additionally, the game being made for PS5 was pushing costs further, which added to the skepticism from Sony's side. However, work continued nonetheless. Sometime in spring of 2019, a section of the remake was completed. This was intended as a demo to present the general idea and feel of the rest of the game. Again, Sony was apparently not convinced. Time passed, and as Visual Arts hoped to enter full production on the game, the decision was made to move most of the team to supporting the recently delayed The Last of Us Part 2. That game was, as we all know, eventually completed and launched in mid-2020. After this, the decision was made by Sony to assign dozens of Naughty Dog developers to the remake project, some of which were veterans of the original game. It wasn't long before the game was moved to be under the control of Naughty Dog entirely, with Visual Arts falling back into more of a supporting role, which is where the game is supposedly at right now, roughly 2 years later. Several publications have suggested that the original plan was to bundle Part 2 and this remake together as one big package, something that obviously did not happen. As for details on the game itself, it's down to rumors, just like the rest of the game really. It is, from everything we have heard the past year or so, going to be a PS5 exclusive. Something we can derive from the fact that most people with insider information, especially Bloomberg, state this. as well as the game supposedly being more expensive to develop because of its use of PS5 tech. I would be very much surprised if they were to tie their hands with 9-year-old hardware just to potentially reach more people who don't yet have a PS5. It is also supposedly made on the new Naughty Dog engine, the very same one that was used for Part 2, something that has led to rumors of it taking features and mechanics from it instead of remaking the original just as it was. This includes, among other things, better shooting mechanics, AI, the jumping and proning system, dodging, and more. But considering that this isn't from Jason Schreier and his Bloomberg article, where the only thing mentioned is that the game will be using a quote-unquote new graphical engine for the PS5, I would be more cautious about taking that part as seriously. There is, obviously, no release date. I mean, the game doesn't even officially exist yet. However, considering a number of factors, we can probably guess very roughly when it might be coming. Firstly, if the remake was supposed to ship with The Last of Us Part 2, there has to have been some internal estimate or plan to actually be able to finish it in a relatively short time. Part 2 was slated for an early 2020 release before the delay. We have to assume that if the plan was to indeed package the remake with it, it too would have to be done by then. I mean, how else would it work? This might indicate that the game might actually be very far along right now and possibly even close to release as we speak. On the other hand though, let's not forget what the Bloomberg article was really about. Internal strife and problems within Sony's first-party studios. Visual Arts was supposedly taken off of the remake before even entering full production, according to the article. If this is the case, the game would realistically not have moved that far beyond just having a single segment completed, as was the case in early 2019, until the summer of 2020, since the majority of the team simply did not work on it as they were transferred to Part 2. On the other hand though, Inverse.com makes the case that remakes don't really take that long to complete, at least not in the case of Sony, citing the Demon's Souls PS5 remake taking around 2 years to complete. Which, if work on the TLOU remake began in mid-2020, would mean a mid-2022 release date, which when this article was written coincided pretty well with the then expected air date of the TLOU HBO show, which was expected to air sometime in the second half of 2022. While we now know that the show won't air until 2023, I think it's a reasonable prediction that if the game couldn't be packaged with Part 2, the next best thing is probably to launch it hand in hand with the show, which would likely boost sales/ratings and interest in both. However, since the show is now pushed back roughly half a year, if we are to go with theory of a release alongside it, that puts the earliest launch sometime in early 2023. Worth mentioning are that a few outlets, amongst them VCC, claimed earlier this year that industry insiders had confirmed that the remake was close to completion, and that it would release in mid-2022. Though this was before the HBO chief content officer confirmed that the show would not air in 2022. While a scenario still exists in which the remake and show are launched and aired completely independently of each other, I personally think it's more likely they'll be packaged together, since that was supposedly the original intent. Though it is possible they'll do it like Disney is handling their Star Wars shows, or AMC and their several Walking Dead shows. That is, sprinkle the releases out across the year to always have content coming out, and in turn keeping their respective franchises more relevant, instead of having massive, for lack of a better word, content drops and then long waits in between. There's not really much to do besides speculate, of course, though it's not like us TLOU fans are unfamiliar with that. Finally, I also want to quickly mention Neil Druckmann's supposed tease of this remake while in an interview for the Uncharted movie. He supposedly wore a cap reading The Last of Us Part 1, but I find this to be a long shot. I mean, all the pictures I have seen are very blurry, and to me it just looks like a combination of bad image quality and the particular angle of the image, causing the Roman 2 to look like a Roman 1. Though you can judge for yourself here. So we got...
shotguns and bombs.
Well, no, Joel, but we got a TLOU remake. What does this mean for The Last of Us? What direction is the franchise taking? And what can we expect from the remake itself? Is it a good idea? What do I think about it? We'll talk about all of that in this next segment. I would like to start off this segment and add it to the previous segment as well by saying that I have not been caught up on anything The Last of Us at all. Like, not even a little bit. I've not even seen a single episode of that The Last of Us podcast that I think started around the time of Part 2 launch. Nor have I watched any TLOU related videos, read any articles or interviews, aside from the ones for this video of course. I have for all intents and purposes been entirely out of the TLOU loop for pretty much 2 years, give or take a few months. Which means you should probably take at least the news and out-of-universe theories from this video with a grain of salt. Basically a long-winded way to say that I don't really know anything about current TLOU stuff. As for what this means for The Last of Us, and I know this is not the reason it's being made since development began way before the launch of Part 2, but I like to think of it as Sony and Naughty Dog not completely throwing out, for lack of a better word, what the quote-unquote old TLOU used to be about, to only move forward with a Part 3 or something. Not leaving the old fans / the ones that didn't enjoy Part 2 behind. It might be a dumb comparison, but kinda like Disney Star Wars, and them making The Mandalorian and the Clone Wars Season 7, as in not making and continuing only the new thing, recognizing that there are different parts of the fanbase that want different things and trying to satisfy all of those parts. I guess you could call it a peace offering to those of us that did not enjoy Part 2, even if, again, that is definitely not the actual reason for it. In my opinion though, it signals to disgruntled-ish fans like me that The Last of Us is not done with Joel, and that they're still willing to dedicate tons of resources to old-style TLOU. Which, on a side note, for me at least, brings back some long-lost hope and passion for it. Another, and perhaps more realistic way to look at it is that Sony is just doing something that is certain to make them a lot of money. And that the whole thing doesn't really have anything to do with The Last of Us in and of itself. Or, in other words, a cash grab. Which is the position most people aside from the more hardcore fans seem to hold. And I'd say that's a fair analysis of the situation. The Last of Us is a flagship franchise for PlayStation, a system seller, a tech demo of what their hardware is capable of. It makes total sense to remake and repackage something already so successful and ride on that success even further from a financial standpoint. I mean, it's not like it's a strategy unheard of in the industry. Or even one that's unheard of for The Last of Us itself, with remastered being a thing. That being said, even if I think it's fair to technically call it a cash grab, I don't agree with the negative sentiment around it, that it's supposedly lazily recycling content and that The Last of Us doesn't need a remake. I mean, by that standard, remastered should be an even bigger crime, since it's merely a port with increased FPS and resolution, rather than a full-on from-the-ground-up remake. The way I see it, The Last of Us is the best game of all time. But that doesn't mean its technical limitations can't be improved upon. Remastered, with the minor changes it brought, was hugely more enjoyable than the original simply because of the higher frame rate. Just imagine the same thing, but add PS5 adaptive trigger and haptic features, the graphics of Part 2, improved movement, way less janky AI, more fluid controls, better shooting, etc, etc. I for one find myself super hyped just thinking about it. Though I can see how from a purist standpoint people wouldn't want them to change anything, for me personally, I'm only really a purist when it comes to the lore and story. I don't consider the technical limitations imposed on the game by the PS3 as sacred. As for the argument that The Last of Us doesn't need a remake, I don't really oppose it. Actually, I kinda agree. The game is perfect as it is, and if Sony were to never make a remake of it, I'd be fine with it. But I'm not opposed to them doing one either. I understand that there is a lot of anger and disappointment amongst other than TLOU Sony fans. I understand that people who wanted a Days Gone 2, who then hear about The Last of Us getting a second re-release, while that was canned, are disappointed. I understand people who want a Part 3 or the Part 2 equivalent of Left Behind are disappointed this is supposedly taking priority, or at least as far as we know. And to that, I can't really say more than that I'm biased. I did not enjoy Days Gone, and I did not enjoy Part 2, but The Last of Us is my favorite game of all time, and I'm all for it getting a modern technical makeover, even if it comes at the expense of the aforementioned other franchises/games. Moving on, what does this mean for the direction of the TLOU franchise? Well, I guess I mostly covered that just now, but in short, I think this shows that The Last of Us is not done. Not just with Joel, but overall. Neil did say that The Last of Us was supposed to be this complete two-part story years ago, but there's already been discussions about a potential Part 3, as well as rumors of there being several TLOU projects in the works at the moment. It looks to me as if The Last of Us is taking the route of Uncharted, which, as it stands right now, counting remasters and remakes, consists of 10 games and 1 movie. Something I'm not directly opposed to, but won't really get hyped over either. To me, it all depends on what kind of stories they'll tell going forward. Essentially, what they'll focus on. If it just means a Part 3 and a 4, and maybe further with Abby and Lev, then count me out. If it, on the other hand, means this remake, a Joel and Tommy backstory expansion/game, Factions 2 with co-op, games with other characters, perhaps exploring Fedra and the Fireflies, and so on, well, then I'm excited. I'd also be totally up for them expanding the universe through other mediums than games, even if that's what I, and I assume most others, would prefer. They could, for example, do more comics, books, and perhaps movies outside of the already announced show to flesh out the world even more. Finally, let's talk about what I think we can expect from this remake. Considering it is most likely developed on the same engine that was used for Part 2, I think it's fair to make the same assumptions some of the outlets mentioned in the All We Know segment did. A new engine doesn't just mean better graphics. All of the underlying systems tied to things like controls, movement, AI, combat are ingrained into it as well. This means that it's very likely that there will be substantial gameplay improvements on top of the obvious graphical improvements. Adding to this is the fact that one of the original ambitions from Visual Arts Group was to redesign gameplay mechanics. What I don't think we can expect from it is a remaster of Factions, considering Factions 2 is still reportedly in development. I don't think we'll get any other additions either, like a new story expansion or anything akin to it. Maybe Left Behind will be remade as well, but there's been nothing on that in any of the articles I've read. However, this is bleeding into what I want to talk about in the next segment of the video, so let's move on. So, in this segment I want to discuss what I'd like to see in the remake. Not necessarily what I think is realistic or what I think will happen, but simply my ideal version of it. Starting with the absolute most important thing of all. which, kind of contradictory to the title of this segment, is something I do not want to see. I do not want to see any changes at all to the story. Absolutely zero. Zilch. Nada. No retconning anything to fit Abby into the ending, or even mentioning the surgeon being called Jerry. Nor do I want them to even make it better fit with Left Behind in any way. It should remain, story-wise, exactly as it was in 2013. End of discussion. The only story I would be okay with changing, which is not really changing, is them adding non-main story related lore in new artifacts, and as environmental storytelling in potentially new explorable areas to flesh them out. And perhaps as flavored dialogue between NPCs in areas like the Boston Quarantine Zone. Speaking of new areas, The Last of Us is a very linear game, which is not a problem per se, but sometimes it's very restrictive when it doesn't really need to be. Many times, as have been said by Naughty Dog themselves, this was because of memory limitations on the PS3, preventing them from having larger explorable areas. It has since been found by people in the Naughty Dog modding community, amongst them Freako, which this footage is taken from, that many of the levels in the game were originally much bigger, but were cut down for the final release. Something that Naughty Dog in large part could stop doing when they moved over to developing for the PS4. Their games then started getting much more open, while still being linear of course, as can be seen in Uncharted 4, Uncharted The Lost Legacy, and of course The Last of Us Part 2. As this seems to have been the original plan and ambition, even back during The Last of Us's development, in combination with the fact that this is such a nice add-on to all the games following The Last of Us, I would totally be okay with, and even prefer, bigger explorable areas in the remake. Not ridiculously so, like them, for example, showing a Seattle downtown-sized area into it, but take Billstown, for example, which is already one of the game's more open areas. I think it could do with way less barricades and gamey corridors, and be more in the style of the Capitol Hill chapter of The Last of Us Part 2. It doesn't have to change anything story-wise, but it could go a long way in terms of immersion, as well as making exploring much more fun. All the little previously blocked alleyways and shops could be open for exploration, with the odd world-building artifact here and there, and perhaps some more infected encounters. Of course, some barricades still need to be there to block off the level, and to reinforce Bill's personality of being overly paranoid. But you get my point. This is just one of many potential examples. Others being the UEC campus, the Pittsburgh ambush scene, etc. I would also like to see an overhaul of the gameplay in the style of Part 2. It needs to be familiar, of course, but removing a lot of the jank while adding the smoothness of Part 2 would be amazing. It would, of course, have to be changed to fit Joel's character over Abby and Ellie, but things like the ability to craft ammunition and silencers, to squeeze through tight spaces to get away fast, to go prone and go underneath cars, to have more verticality by climbing and jumping between things more easily, to have smarter enemies systematically sweep areas, perhaps with guard dogs too, would all be very welcome to enhance the feel of the game. Part 2 always had me partly or entirely out of the story, but kept me immersed with these amazing systems. If The Last of Us had these systems, I would not be able to put the game down. The immersion would be next level. All of that being said, I doubt we'll get all this in the remake. I mean, the graphics are a given, as are a lot of the gameplay stuff, but the areas are probably more of wishful thinking. And I'm sure they wouldn't be able to resist adding things to make it better tie in with Part 2. But I can dream. So, those are my thoughts on this rumored The Last of Us remake. What new things do you think we'll see? When do you think it'll be officially announced and released? Do you agree with my points, or do you disagree? Be sure to tell me in the comments down below. And I don't usually ask this of people watching my videos, but if you're new here and enjoy The Last of Us, why not consider subscribing? And until next time, have a great day.